There was a time when a taxi plate could have changed hands for as much as €100,000. There was another just a few years later when it was worth just a fraction of that. Fresh from protests against Uber's plans to introduce a fixed fare option and worries from the hospitality industry about a shortage of supply in rural areas, taxis were in the headlines again this week. The Competition Authority said that barriers to ride-hailing platforms fully entering the Irish market should be removed. Transport Minister Darragh O'Brien said the government has no intention of doing so, but what shake-up did the CCPC recommend for the taxi industry and why? It recommended that the barriers to Uber and Bolt fully entering the Irish taxi market should be lifted, and all drivers should be allowed to use their own cars without needing a special licence. It said the current state of the taxi market is holding back innovation and limiting the choice available to customers, including issues with long waits and the availability of taxis. But ride-sharing will not be coming anytime soon. On Thursday, Transport Minister Darragh O'Brien said it is not government policy and there is no intention to introduce it. The taxi business was once so highly regulated that the restricted number of licences issued could just not meet the demand. The borrowing or sale of taxi plates had the potential to become a lucrative business in itself. But there were queues of hundreds of people outside civic offices after the deregulation of the industry was announced in 2000, when the value of a taxi plate fell dramatically from up to €100,000 to virtually nothing. Drivers who had borrowed to pay for the plates were left with sizable debts, and the number of taxis on the road soared, particularly in Dublin, and it is often claimed that the capital once had more taxis than New York City. Another cap on licences was introduced in 2010, and there's been tinkering around the edges of the regulations in the meantime, including with the National Transport Authority setting maximum fares. But taxi policy has remained largely unchanged over the last 10 years, while drivers have had their work transformed by the advent of taxi booking apps. The national taxi fleet has shrunk by around 40% since 2009, with drivers recently citing concerns about their safety, the growth of taxi booking apps, and the threat of further deregulation. The latest CCPC report has been described as an important intervention that should kickstart the wider conversation about industry reform by the Taxis for Ireland coalition, which is also backed by Uber and Bolt. It remains to be seen whether this will be the case. You can read about this story and more on the Irish Independent.